Thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. We're just going to let everybody have a moment to log into the webinar, and we'll start off here just in a few moments. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For this session, Summit is proud to have our guests from the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, Switchgear and GableGotwals law firm. The session is focused on benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We do have the Q&A feature available, so you can submit questions through that option. And if there's time at the end of the session, those questions will get addressed. You may also submit any questions to us via email. Our email address is marketing@yoursummit.com, but I will display that email address again near the end of our session today. So let's get started. We have 4 guests joining us today. Our first is Tom Vincent. Tom is an attorney and focuses his practice on legal issues involving cybersecurity, data privacy, compliance, and corporate governance. Currently, Tom serves as the co-chair of the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. His other memberships include the Oklahoma Bar Association, Tulsa County Bar Association, American Bar Association, International Association of Privacy Professionals, Institute of Certified Bankers, and Oklahoma Bankers Association. Tom also serves as a co-chair for the banking group for the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance and is chair of the Finance Committee for the Tulsa Zoo and as a trustee for the Oklahoma Bar Foundation. Our next panelist is Dixie Agostino. As president of Switchgear, Dixie uses her knack for understanding people to create an energized workplace for both her business and her clients. She has spent 15 years learning what makes people give their best at work, which in turn has made her an expert in company culture, talent acquisition, and employee engagement. Her firm's clients range from family-owned businesses to Fortune 500 companies, yet they all share Dixie's passion to maximize people. Named one of Oklahoma's most admired CEOs and Young Entrepreneurs of the Year, Dixie is proud to work alongside her amazing team of superheroes at Switchgear. Our next panelist is Moises Echeverria. Moises serves as president and CEO of the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, an organization dedicated to achieving respect and understanding for all people. In his current role, Moises aims to promote respect and understanding for all people through education, advocacy, and dialogue. Through his efforts, thousands of Oklahoma students and adults have gained new insights and appreciation for diversity and a realization that we stand on common ground. He has received multiple awards for his work in the community, including the Russell Bennett Award by Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry, the Circle of Friends in Service Award by the Links Incorporated, Impacto Hispanic Young Professional of the Year Award by the Tulsa Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and the Oklahoma Human Rights Award by the Oklahoma Human Rights Alliance. In 2018, Moises was recognized by Oklahoma Magazine as one of 4 Oklahomans of the Year. And our 4th panelist is Jill Young. With more than 2 decades in the Summit leadership team, Jill began as Chief Business Development Officer, serving for 8 years while also supervising numerous registered representatives throughout the U.S. as Summit's Compliance Officer. Jill currently serves as Summit's General Counsel, building and developing relationships with our community and clients. And now I will hand it off to Jill to begin today.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here with some great speakers and friends on the call today. Happy to host this call on DE&I, which is a very relevant and important statewide, national, and global topic. The goal today is really just to do our part at Summit and raise the dialogue and awareness with our clients and friends who are here on this call today. So Tom and Dixie are going to basically just outline the what of DE&I, and Moises is going to outline the how you do it, how to incorporate DE&I best practices into your organization. So just to kind of reiterate what Megan said, Tom Vincent is an attorney with Gable, and he's a great resource. He's been a friend of Summit, and we've worked with Tom for a number of years in our organization. So we wanted to introduce him to you, and he speaks on this topic a lot. So wanted to provide that information to you, and he's a great legal resource on DE&I. Dixie, her staffing firm specializes in helping organizations attract talent by understanding corporate culture and promoting employee engagement. So she's another great resource. And last but not least, my friend Moises. I serve on the board of OCCJ. And so Moises is the CEO of the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice. I'm they're leading right now in the state of Oklahoma. They're leading the charge in DE&I as one of 5 statewide organizations that have come together. It's called Advancing Oklahoma Initiative. And so OCCJ, Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, Leadership Oklahoma, Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and the Oklahoma Academy have all come together to really just further this discussion and dialogue. OCCJ also serves as consultants to organizations like yours, and through their inclusive workplace initiative, through education, professional development, and training. They also have a leadership institute in the fall that you can send employees to learn more about this. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to these wonderful speakers. We're happy to have them here today. So turn it over to Tom, and then Dixie and Moises.
Thanks, Jill. As we're going to talk about today, there are definite reasons, and I would say objective reasons, for not just paying attention to this issue, but taking action in this issue. We've got time for Q&A at the end, so I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A at the end, so I don't want to take up a lot of time at the front. But I do want to emphasize that a lot of what Dixie and I and Moises are going to be talking about are not necessarily going to be huge steps to take. A lot of these methods that we're going to talk about are things that you're probably already doing, just suggesting you do them in a little different way to see not just subjective benefits, and by that I mean attitudes of employees and customers and in some cases the community, but also objective benefits in terms of the revenue that may result in the increased attention that your company gets, the better tenure that you have with your employees that'll cut down on hiring and retraining costs, and just in general, a better attitude and environment in your organization. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dixie, and she can speak to the objective benefits in a way much better than I can. So, Dixie?
Let's get into it. The core of where kind of this concept, what we're going to be talking about, came from was from an experience that we had in seeing clients miss revenue opportunities. I had back-to-back, this happened 3 times. One specifically happened. Actually, Megan, will you also put up the slides for us? I had a company that wanted to open up into the Russian mining industry. And it is incredibly challenging to find someone who has Russian contacts and is also willing to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then on top of that, to find culture fit. Well, what we understood was culture fit within the organization and culture fit within the client weren't being addressed. And so the client ended up saying, they're not a culture fit for us here. And instead of finding a bridge to find a way to where we can make our culture fit where we're going to need to go with our clients. So let's switch to the next slide. One more time. All right. So ultimately what we were talking about too is I had an experience after oil and gas crash where I had an entire team with all their contacts and knowledge in oil and gas, and the market was dead. And so we had to completely redefine who we served and completely start over in a sales function. The more we had diverse and resilient mindsets on our team, the better they were able to reach out into sales functions and increase revenue. So it wasn't so much a matter of, am I decreasing my risk by hiring smart people? I'm also making money that way. Time and time again, case study after case study, McKinsey has tons. Better gender diversity and ethnic diversity equals better performance, bottom line performance. And like Tom said, over and over again, our society is becoming more diverse and more aware of the diversity that we live in. So we have to make a fit, not just for our internal culture, but fit to our clients, fit to our vendors, and fit to our potential. How do we look out in the world? So not to mention, the younger generation cares more and more about how we treat them as an entire person, as opposed to just what can they deliver in the moment. Can we go to the next slide? All right, so we already know what we're doing. We just can do it more consciously. And Tom can pitch in on this too, but how do we reach out to more diverse communities? And how do we build these things? This is what Moises is really going to get into later. Let's switch to the next one.
Oh, hold on just a second, Dixie. Oh, sorry, can we go?
I'm sorry, that was my favorite slide you guys saw real fast.
Sorry. And I do not want to take attention away from that slide, but one thing I just wanted to add, just to give you all a specific example, not just in the community, but in your own organization. You know, I'm an attorney, and part of the skills that attorneys have to develop is ways to talk to prospects, to identify what their needs are, to be able to communicate in a way that the prospect understands, to reach that prospect's goal to make them a client, and in doing so, attain that goal in a way that's mutually beneficial. And as Dixie and I asked, you know, the first time she and I did this presentation, the question that we would always ask is, if we're willing to do that for clients that pay us money, why aren't we willing to do that with employees that earn us money, and to make them as strong and as connected and as good a relationship as we have with those clients? So anyway, Dixie, on to the next slide. And this one,
my favorite slide.
This one's yours.
We give this presentation regularly, and I ask, why did this product fail? And half the room raises their hand right off the bat, you know who it is, and half the room looks a little puzzled, because clearly there were not any women in the design of this pool floaty, because it looks like a maxi pad, and no one wants to float your pool in a feminine hygiene product. But when we also think about like Chevy Nova, no Spanish speakers on that product development team. When we think about, do you guys remember green ketchup? I mean, anyway, so what we're talking about is when we have more diversity on our teams, we make less fails. So we can flip to the next one. And this is really the emphasis on the changing face of America. I mean, more and more, we are not going to stay static. It is not the 50s. We are moving forward and things are changing. So as things change, we develop with it. Flip to the next slide. This is also the first time that we've had all 5 generations in the workplace. So not only are we encountering more and more ethnic diversity, we're encountering more age diversity and different viewpoints. When you've got someone who grew up in the Great Depression and was deeply impacted by World War II, they come at things from a different mindset than the generation that's coming up now, who will probably be known as the pandemic generation. I mean, they will have a different way of communicating, having been isolated for a year, than someone who has been through the civil rights movement, maybe. So what we're trying to do is find ways that we can communicate with 5 generations, all ethnicities, and still connect to our clients and our vendors in a way that decreases our risk and maximizes our profit, and is doing the right thing.
And one thing I'd like to add there, just certainly as the parent of a teenager, and I know Dixie, you can speak to this as well. You know, Dixie mentioned when the slide came up about ethnic diversity, one of the things that certainly I've seen in my 15-year-old is, in part because of their connections through social media, is a recognition of many more categories of diversity than we've seen before. Mm-hmm. When we talk about things like neurodiversity, which includes, you know, individuals with ADHD, individuals who are on the spectrum, you have this greater recognition of of how someone may be different from the norm, and whatever the norm is that constantly changes as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, another factor for this is, as we're getting, it's not just the workplace differences and the work styles and the expectations, but really it's the language that's being used when we talk about diversity. And it's becoming more and more important, not just in the actions of a company, but in the language that it uses, that diversity be recognized as well.
Next slide. All right, and this is a rare time that we've had a lot of jobs open, but also like a lot of candidates available. We've had persistent low employment for years, then we had the pandemic, and now employment is different, but we still have a ton of open jobs because we've got a different view of work now. People are wanting to find a way to be more of themselves at work as opposed to fitting into a certain box. Companies are now having to adapt and flex to the employees as opposed to you do what you're told, sit there for 20 years and get your gold watch. All right, and more of life moves online, including learning. This slide was before the pandemic. So now how do we shake out when we've had to live a life, but many of us have had to live a life online for about a year. So next one. And then we're also moving from, one of the things I want to talk about is resumes, and Moises is going to probably get into it more, but I love blind resumes. I hate the idea of we will get along because we went to the same university, or we won't get along because you went to, you know, you grew up here or you went to this university. What we want to talk about is what is actually important. Where you went to school is not going to come in and make us money probably, but if you identify with our shared goals and values, now we have a commitment both ways. As our employees are in on our mission and we're in on their mission. So we have less turnover, more engagement, and hopefully happier people. Next slide. All right, we're sorry we're going through this because Moises has a lot of information to give. What we just want to emphasize is that this is not just a matter of decreasing risk, although it is. It is also a function of increasing profit and maximizing your PR and the way that you look in the world. We don't have the option so much anymore to just be like, this is the way that we've always done it. Things are changing so quickly and we have to adapt.
And one last thing on this slide before we get into Moises's presentation. We'll talk more about risk later in the Q&A, but when we talk about the risks that we're talking about are not just involving lawsuits or things that may be traditionally thought of as a risk, but more and more we're seeing risks such as the risk of client attrition if this is not something that we pay attention to because our clients ask us about it. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, as Dixie hit on before, you have the risk of that you have an opportunity risk of losing an employee that may be able to build a business line for you because you're not presenting the right environment for them. So, well, again, we'll get into these issues later on in the Q&A, but I wanted to make those, just wanted to make this point before we got into Moises's presentation, because we're not just talking about things to be defensive about. We're talking about things that require some affirmative steps to address as well.
Next one. Okay. Moises, it's your jam. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you, both of you, for getting us to this point of understanding why this is important. And I'm excited to talk about the next phase. And Megan, if we can go to the next slide. I wanted to share with you some really practical things that you can walk away today and at least start one or two things. If you have the capacity to do them, you will be able to take at least two things from right now. One of the things I wanted to mention before I go through these examples is that all of you represent very different industries, and I am not an expert in your industry. However, the three of us have a lot of expertise and experience and on creating and implementing strategies to improve diversity and inclusion. The beauty and the challenge about this work is that it has to be tailored to your organization, to your business. It has to, and that's why large organizations, large employers have a position, have a diversity and inclusion director or manager or VP. For some of us who have smaller organizations, we don't have that luxury to be able to have a position that solely dedicates in those strategies. But a lot of times it's easy to accommodate some of this within HR or within senior management. But ultimately, what I want you to consider during the next 15 minutes is for you to think about, as I give these examples, for you to think about what you're already doing in your company that's working in regards to these best practices, what you're already doing that could be improved, and then what's being done, what's happening at your company that needs to stop. And so if you can think about us throughout these examples of those three categories, those three columns of what are we doing good, what can we improve on, and what do we need to stop? And I say that because a lot of times we're doing some of this work, and if you're an achiever like myself, you oftentimes look at all the things that you still need to do and accomplish, and we don't take time to stop and celebrate our successes and the work that has been taking place. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about 5 pillars, 5 areas that diversity and inclusion strategies need to be embedded in. And so regardless of your industry, regardless of your position, every company that has been a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion has strategies, has metrics, has things around these 5 areas. So we're going to be talking about each one of those pillars and giving some examples of things that can be done, but just keep this in mind. So leadership, outreach, people, suppliers, and then policies. And all of these things are the foundation. Once we start working and once we start strategizing and finding areas that we need to improve within one of these pillars, we realize that it's like a rabbit hole, and we realize all the things that we didn't know, and then start gaining knowledge and skills to improve in those areas. So we'll start with leadership commitment, but I also want to make sure that you understand that these are not in order of importance, that these are not in order of where you start. The work takes place in all of these 5 simultaneously, or maybe in one area and then followed by another, but there's things that all of you can do and walk away today and start implementing. So we'll start with leadership commitment on the next slide. And diversity and inclusion strategies within organizations in order for them to be sustainable and to have a long-term impact, they require a top-down approach if we want to maintain them. It's just very simple and direct. And I know that some of you are in different levels of hierarchy within your organizations. And some of your organizations and businesses may not have currently support from the CEO or the founder or senior leadership. That's not to say that you're not going to succeed in these efforts. I think that regardless of your position, you are here and you're learning more about it. And there is a business case like Dixie and Tom mentioned. And so you can start looking at what is the business case and how can you showcase to top leadership that strategies around diversity and inclusion are important to improve your profits, your reach, and to grow your company. But ultimately, if you don't already have commitment at the top leadership levels, then you need to start working on crafting the message in a way that is going to resonate for them. And in order to do that, again, there is a business case for D&I, and Dixie talked about that. And there's a lot of wonderful resources on showcasing how successfully implementing strategies for diversity and inclusion improves the bottom line. And then once we see this in organizations of all sizes, once organizations and businesses start their journey in diversity and inclusion, they see the impact, they see that it's needed, that is meaningful, and slowly but surely more resources, more buy-in and more resources are invested in implementing these strategies. So for leadership commitment, some examples of what that looks like in practice is what you have on the screen. Is the CEO, founder, the senior VPs, or whatever the size of organization, the senior leadership, are they constantly communicating and stating that diversity and inclusion is important to them? If they're not, if the messages are coming from mid-level management and it's not affirmed by top leadership, then there's going to be that disconnect of what really matters for employees and values and the culture of the company. The other really critical piece, and all of you know the critical need to have metrics for things that are important that we want to improve on. And diversity and inclusion has a lot of opportunities for us to track numbers and be able to see after 6 months or 3 quarters or however you measure your time in your organization to see if you're improving or if you need to change your strategies. And so making sure that those metrics are making their way up to top leadership. Other things aside from what's on the slide that top leadership can demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion is very common for organizations who are in this journey to have a diversity council, and it's important for a top leader in the organization to chair or oversee that council, to hold regular meetings with executives, and to ask and to review the goals and the performance, to provide annual updates on diversity to a board of directors, if there's one, and then just embed diversity and inclusion throughout the whole strategy of the business growth. The next slide is really simple, and this is outreach in the community. It's important for us to walk the walk and not just talk the talk, right? So one of the ways that we can do that is to showing our commitment in the community by participating in events throughout the year and supporting organizations that benefit, especially that benefit communities that have been disenfranchised. One way to track this, for example, is if the leaders within the organization or just team members serve on boards or volunteer their time. If there's an HR department that can start tracking that and showcasing the number of hours that employees are giving back to the community, and especially again highlighting communities that have been disenfranchised. This helps in multiple ways. Not only does it build employee engagement, but also showcases the interest in investing in the community, increases the visibility of your business, shows that your business is committed to the community where it resides. And then outreach in the community also has the potential to improve employee satisfaction and retention, as well as attracting potential new employees, which leads me to the next pillar, which is that of people. And one of the biggest challenges and one of the first things that organizations mention when they're in their journey of diversity and inclusion, I think that one of the first things that comes to mind is diversity of employees. And one of the challenges is, well, we're just not getting applicants who are diverse. I mean, Dix is an expert in this area, so she can definitely talk a lot more eloquently about this than I can. But it's important for us to look at where we're recruiting, and making sure that we're partnering with if, for example, if racial and ethnic minorities is an area where we lack diversity within our workforce. So partnering with minority serving institutions in the area to develop a recruitment plan, attending job fairs, community junior 4-year colleges, depending on the area for, I guess, entry-level positions, different positions within your business, and making sure that those institutions of learning serve primarily underrepresented populations. And then asking your existing staff to speak or be guest lecturer at classes, say at a local community junior or 4-year colleges that serve, again, diverse student bodies, just to get your name out there and to showcase that you want to attract these people who are diverse. Another thing that is really important in regards to people is conducting regular audits of the cultural climate of your business, the access points, keeping track of employee turnover, for example, and doing that by demographic information. So if you see that you have a lot of outgoing members from different areas or for specific demographics, that you can start asking those hard questions. Why do we have turnover in this specific demographic, if you find something like that? But again, keeping track of data is critical. There's 2 national indexes. There's the Disability Equality Index and the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, that are fantastic tools for companies that want to ensure that they're doing everything that they can to be accessible for people with disabilities, for people in the LGBTQ, the lesbian, gay, bisexual community. And then you can see a few other examples on the slide. The next slide talks about just from the get-go, if your company is really trying to elevate diversity and inclusion, you want to attract and you want to hire people who are going to be committed to diversity and inclusion, because the worst thing that you can do is to attract all these people who are diverse, they have a bad experience, and they leave your organization. And what's going to happen? They tell their friends and their networks who potentially are similar to them in some way or another demographically, that your place of business is not a welcoming place for people like them. And so you want to make sure that you, from the get-go, are hiring people that value diversity and inclusion. So on the slide here, you can see a few examples of questions to include on the interview process, to get a glimpse of what, where people are in their understanding of diversity and inclusion, and how they can, if there's opportunities for you to, as if they're hired and onboarded, to help your strategy, to implement your strategies. And again, these examples are very general. They need to be tailored to your industry. But I hope that you can look at this and get some ideas of what you can do within your company. And then the last thing that I want to mention on in regards to this slide is each company has, again, everything has to be tailored. So as you do some sort of audit or survey of your workforce, and you realize that you're lacking a specific aspect of diversity, say, let's say, for example, that there's lack of representation of women in the workplace within your company. You can have strategies specifically for those aspects of diversity where you're trying to increase representation. But it's important, again, to understand who's in your team, who's in your building, and how to target those strategies. The next slide talks about suppliers, and this is a wonderful and powerful way to implement and to promote diversity and inclusion, with your money. So all of us have to have we have clients, and then we also have business partners, and contractors, and so on and so forth. And understanding the diversity of those folks that we're in business with is important. Especially being able to track and see at the end of one fiscal year of saying, we engage with X amount of minority-owned businesses, and we spend this amount of money doing business with minority-owned businesses. It's important when we talk about diverse suppliers to define what your scope of supplier diversity is. So some resources, for example, that are national is the National Veteran-Owned Business Association, the Small Business Administration, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, the National LGBT, so that's again the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual Chamber of Commerce. And then educate your organization on supplier diversity plans and objectives. And so you see the example on the slide of being able to explain why supplier diversity is important to you, and just having that somewhere so that is known to the folks who are engaging with this contractors, or again, business to business organizations that you're working with. The next slide is another example, or I think I already touched on this, the common metrics for supplier diversity. So the percentage that you're spending with diverse suppliers, the percentage of certified diverse suppliers that you, the number or the percentage of the certified diverse suppliers that you have, the percentage increase in market share that's attributed to supplier diversity, and then you see the last example there. But like everything else, we will not improve the things that we do not measure. And so with everything here, and again, because we have a lot of industries represented, we cannot give or very specific examples, but when you think about your people, when you think about your leadership, some of the things that you could track and measure and report back, and start seeing some progress after you implement strategies. The last, the next slide focuses on internal policies. One of the things that is the first step that every organization that's going to be doing this needs to have in writing their definition of diversity and inclusion. And I do trainings and I do workshops and talk to a lot of folks. And when I ask them to define diversity and inclusion, and if I want to, depending on their level, throw in equity, it's really fascinating how people have a hard time defining and differentiating those terms. And so for a business to be able to define what it is, why it's important to them, to have it somewhere on their website, to have it internally. Again, if the leaders is communicating these things throughout the year with all staff, it's important to make sure that everyone understands what diversity and inclusion means to that company. Because all of us are coming into these conversations and to these strategies with our own understandings of what diversity and inclusion are. Some of us welcome these conversations and these topics, and some of us have a little bit more guarded and have just different life experiences. All of us do, and so it's important to have that definition. This also, again, when it comes to attracting new talent, it's important to be able to say, if you're being really strategic about attracting new and diverse talent, for them to see what diversity and inclusion means to you. Training. There are a lot of legal implications when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And Tom is the expert on that. But we know that discrimination and harassment are illegal and can get us in different situations that we do not want. So being able to teach your employees how to work together and benefit from each other's experience and differences is really critical to avoid having a diverse team that doesn't know how to have conversations with, when, men, when it comes to gender, when it comes to race, when it comes to age, and, there's protected classes. And so just, there's a lot of things that when it comes to training that need to happen both at the management level, at the senior leadership level, and then just employee in general. The last thing that I'll mention about this is with the forward-looking policies. And I'll just, we talked about hiring already, but when it comes to management, you can look at and research policies that help you make management accountable for promoting inclusion. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to talk more about hiring, but on input, what I mean by that is that the company can determine if there is diversity and tolerance in the workplace by asking their employees. So asking employees, getting feedback, whether, some companies that have more bandwidth because they have multiple staff within them, they do even monthly surveys to measure the effectiveness of diversity policies. But ultimately, you want to create a system in which employees can report unanimously, preferably, any instances where diversity is being hampered, so that human resource staff can investigate. And then staying in touch with the staff to find out if you are creating a diverse workplace. So in closing, for my part, again, because we want to allow some time for questions, these 5 pillars are universal, while the specific strategies within them will need to be tailored for your company. The 5 pillars, you definitely want to make sure that you made a note about what those things are. And then again, hopefully during this time, you have already some examples of the things that you're doing that are really good, that you can report back and say, great on us. And then the things that you can improve on when it comes to these 5 things. And if there's anything that's going on that needs to stop, that needs to change, then being able to know what those are and having a plan of how you see and who are the stakeholders that need to have the buy-in to make those things change. The ultimate goal is not to, the ultimate goal when it comes to diversity and inclusion strategies is for diversity and inclusion to be embedded in every aspect of your business and to empower all your employees in implementing these strategies. So when HR doesn't feel that they're the only ones who are pushing for this, but when HR and management and the entry-level folks and everyone within the organization knows what their role is and feels empowered to say, this is great, I've noticed this in this area, how can, and starts giving you feedback, that is the goal. And that's when we talk about employee satisfaction and all of these things, is when you have an engaged workforce. So I'll stop there and allow for Dixie and Tom. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add before we open it to Q&A.
I think what it ultimately boils down to is a matter of uncomfortable conversations with ourselves and with others. And this is just a practice of constantly getting more and more comfortable with uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
Especially when you can look at it and be like, what do I need to do to get comfortable with this person that's going to make my company $3 million or whatever? That was kind of how we started this question. So.
And to add to that, I wanted to touch on a couple of things that Moises mentioned. One, with respect to the vendor policies. It's important to at least understand those and take a look at your own, but understand also that you may be subject to another company's vendor policy, and they may be looking at how do you meet the criteria of that policy. And so that's another, we talked about risk before. That's another risk is that you may not meet those requirements of one of your clients that's been a client for years, but for whatever reason, they've now taken an approach that they require more diversity in their suppliers, and they look at you and you don't meet it. I've seen that in the legal industry time and again. And also one of the things Moises mentioned with respect to diversity questions and interviewing, and just interviewing generally, one of the things that we've seen, and I've seen before coming to Gable, I was a manager in different financial institutions for about 15 years, and I've interviewed more people than I can count. And I can tell you one of the things that I've seen that does make a difference is when you can look past someone's resume and ask them questions about who they are. Because studies have shown that different biases show up when people write their resumes, positive and negative. And if you are just as a business owner or a sole proprietor or a hiring manager at a large company, if you're relying solely on what the employee is telling you when you're asking them questions, then I think you're doing your company a disservice. And instead ask them, Moises's slide had some examples of behavioral interviewing questions. Tell me about a time where you did this. I mean, don't just let them tell you what they've done. Ask them about things that they haven't tell you, and ask them, more importantly, how they could benefit your company. These are not, these are for some people uncomfortable conversations, to use Dixie's phrase, because they may make the interview go a little longer. They may require you to put some thought into it. But you're talking about, a large financial commitment for your company, and in some cases, not just a commitment, but an opportunity for business. And that's certainly worth that extra time.
When at Switchgear internally, we started putting in the OCCJ pillars, and we started realizing that one of our core values is grit. Like, we need to interview for grit. And we did blind resumes. So I don't get attached to where anyone comes from. And then we ask everyone the exact same questions. So we're minimizing our risk of getting sued for discrimination or whatever. Plus, everyone knows that they have a very consistent process. Everyone feels treated fairly. They know exactly where they are in the process, and it does take longer, but it's shorter in the end. So it increased our interview time from 1 hour to 3 total hours, because we had more time, more conversations, and it cut our training in half, and people started making money for the company in half the time. So instead of me funding your payroll for 6 months before you start generating a profit, now I'm only funding you for like 3 months, and now you've generated a profit. So my training costs are down, my recruitment costs are down, my onboarding costs are down, and people stayed longer. Staffing is a tough industry, and when I get someone who can stay 3 years as opposed to the 1.5 years that's industry standard, I mean, that is incredible. That's bottom line dollars in my pocket. If we're doing something that's just business, it's nice, it's good, and it made me money. Like, whoop, whoop.
That's great. And Tom, I did have a question. Being an attorney and in the compliance world myself, I think about, what can we do from a compliance perspective so that would keep us or help us in the event of a lawsuit. We don't want to think about that, but if it happens, how does this best practice documentation and some of the trainings and education, how could that benefit our clients in terms of just documentation in the event of a lawsuit?
Sure, and I would say it even starts before the documentation phase, because it's going to anytime you engage in this training, you're going to reduce the risk of something happening, which is going to reduce the risk, reduce the need for documentation in the first place. But then, the more that you have these, and you can show that as a company, this is the environment that we're fostering, and if you have someone who is acting improperly, just to be polite, let's call it that, it looks less like the company's position and more like that individual's position, so that it can reduce the risk to the company overall by focusing the motivation for that bad behavior on that individual. And again, that's the importance of, as Moises pointed out, not just the training, but having the mechanisms in place to implement what you're being trained on, which is make sure that human resources recognizes this is an issue. Make sure that your managers are willing to step up and call it out, because the training, you don't want the money and the time that you invest in training to be undermined by a lack of management support and effort after the training has been provided, such that any benefit that you get from the training goes away.
Well, like Moises said, especially when it's coming from the top, the message is coming from the top, it filters down with kind of a stop the line mentality of if the CEO and the president can talk about it, I can talk about it, and we can talk about it. So more things get uncovered before they're a problem. Always run.
And one other thing I wanted to mention from a risk standpoint, Jill, since we had talked about this before, and it goes into I think some of the issues that companies may be considering in terms of the risk reward in implementing something like this, beyond what we've talked about here, is that when I was in compliance for a number of years, and one of the questions I would always get is, well, what are our competitors doing? What is the market risk, let's call it. There is a market risk here. More and more companies are doing this. More and more companies are being vocal about it. And to Dixie's point, you've got more and more people that are entering the workforce where this is a thing for them. And they want that this is part of their environment. It's not a nice to have, it's a have to have. And so just looking at that sort of risk, I never know how current this expression is, because I see it used by my teenager, but then also by other people. If you're familiar with the expression FOMO, fear of missing out, that's something that I know I've seen, and Dixie has too from our conversations. That's something that is occurring here. I think in many instances from companies. It's not a question of, is it something that we have to do, but there are all these great new hires that are coming through. There are these great new efforts from large companies that we want to attract. And if we don't do this, then we're going to miss out.
Fair. Yeah.
Well said. Thank you for that. Any other final comments from Dixie, Moises, or Tom, or anyone have questions? You have the experts here. You have a lawyer here. You can ask the lawyer questions. So you can send it in the chat if you have a question. Otherwise, any further comments?
Jill, if I may just add one thing when it comes to this work, I think it's important for all of us. I mentioned this just kind of in passing, but it's important for us to identify our success stories. It may seem really daunting and overwhelming to think, okay, I have a full-time job and I have all these responsibilities and I'm in this training and now I'm walking away, or I'm the person that has to do all of this within my company, but I have a full-time job. How do I accommodate all of this into my already full plate? So stop, recognize what you're doing well, pat yourself on the back, share that success story with management, with top leadership. It's important for us to do that. It's also important for us to remember two things. This is a long race. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. When it comes to anything having to do with diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, implementation, both in the workplace and in the community, we have to be in it and committed for the long haul, knowing that there's going to be some successes and there's going to be some failures along the way. And when we feel like we take one step forward or two steps forward, we're going to realize, something happens and we're like, oh my gosh, we just took 10 steps back. But we cannot give up. And the other thing too is that the more we learn about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, the more we realize that there's a lot. This is a lot, and that's why there's people that is their whole title, and they have teams within organizations that multiple people who manage the strategies of diversity and inclusion. So it's a journey. It is not a destination. We will never have enough check boxes to say, okay, we're done for this year. We finished, we achieved diversity and inclusion within our company. It's a journey, and we just need to understand that, and that we need to make progress each quarter, each year, and just keep chipping at it, keep chipping at it, but not to feel, if we feel overwhelmed, to reach out for help. There's people like Dixie and Tom and many others who can help organizations.
Moises, there are a couple of questions in the chat. So if you can hit on those, are you seeing those?
Moises, Pam is asking about conducting an audit of cultural climate. Where would someone get tools for that?
So there's great tools online, and cultural climate. You can do, there's 1,001 examples online, and they can be really focused and tailored to say, for example, you realize that you want to explore more in regards to race or ethnicity or language or gender. So you can get really specific to get audits on those. You can get pretty general and just try to get like the first step of sensing, what are people's level of comfort when it comes to topics of diversity and inclusion within my company. But if you Google cultural climate audit, you will get a lot of different examples. There's a lot out there in regards to race, just because there's a lot of things happening nationally around race relations, and so you can find a lot of that. But if there's anything that's more specific to other types of diversity or demographics, you can reach out to me, and I'll be happy to send you some specific examples of tools. The national indexes that I mentioned were the Human Rights Campaign, which focuses on LGBTQ outreach, and then there's also the Disability Equality Index. So the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index and the Disability Equality Index, and those two are just really, really powerful ways. And again, Fortune 500 companies utilize these indexes to measure their journeys in these aspects of inclusion.
Wonderful. Okay, Megan, you want to close the call out?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I would like to thank Tom and Dixie, Moises, and Jill for sharing taking their time and sharing this valuable information with us today. And we would like to thank all of you for joining our session. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. We host webinars regularly on various topics: benefits, investments, HR consulting. We always want to be a resource for you, so be sure to follow us for more information on that. We are also excited to host an in-person seminar with CPE, SHRM, and HCRI credits this fall with some of our partners from BKD. And that session will dive deeper into the legislative and regulatory landscape for benefits. If you have any questions that weren't answered today, please feel free to send it to us at marketing@yoursummit.com, and we will make sure that the appropriate party is able to provide an answer for you. But for now, thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.